Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of X-Men 97 episode 5, Remember It. I think maybe one of the best episodes of the X-Men animated series ever. Remember It was, of course, a phrase often spoken by Gambit during the 90s run, but mon ami, does he make the words count in this episode. I've been predicting we've seen a Genosha Mutant Massacre on this show, but not like this. Not like this. There's so much to break down from this, including what the hell really happened here, and why this was such a nexus point. Even the freaking Watcher had front row tickets to it. So let's break this episode down frame by frame for all the Easter eggs and animation details you might have missed, because this is a crime scene and we have to scrutinize every detail. And the shirt I'm wearing is our Storm Heed My Command shirt, but also in honor of this episode, we have a Gambit shirt coming down the pipeline. You can grab both by going to nerdriot.shop. Okay, let's start with some updates to the opening sequence. We see the shot of Cable fighting Apocalypse. This is from season 4, episode 18, Beyond Good and Evil Part 1, when Cable and his son Tyler and some other rebels infiltrate Apocalypse's Lazarus chamber just to find it's a trap laid by Apocalypse to acquire this time travel technology. And this specific cube does come back this episode. It's gonna be very important in the season, I think. But is it Apocalypse or is it Cable the reason why we are seeing this here? Because Cable does return this episode, but I feel like the Apocalypse of it all might be why we're seeing it. He could be the he that Cable is warning about. Cassandra Nova is behind the E. It's for Extinction, Fall of Genosha Attack, and Grant Morrison's comics, but Cable does say he. They add back in this shot of Storm fighting Callisto in front of the other Morlocks from season 1, episode 5, Captain Part. Obviously, we're seeing this because Callisto croaks this episode. And then we see this interesting shot of Gambit and Nightcrawler fighting side by side, Gambit with sabers in each hand. Okay, on the news, Trish Tilby reports. Trish Tilby is a longtime TV reporter who first appeared in X Factor number 7 in 1986, but also cameoed in the season 5, episode 10, Graduation Day episode. She sits down with Beast, making him blush by golly damn a renowned scientist. Like, that's what does it for him. And of course, we see the photo of the original X-Men team in their costumes from the first ever comic appearance in 1961, including the adorable Cloud version of Bobby Drake Iceman. Jubilee joins the interview too, saying their classes include Big Death Machines and Vampire Dinosaurs. Big Death Machines referring to Sentinels in the Danger Room, and Vampire Dinosaurs referring to Sauron, Dr. Carl Lycos from the Savage Land episodes, a Pteranodon mutant who is an energy vampire. We see Morph and Wolverine shooting some b-ball outside school when a couple of youngins who were up to no good. I'm sorry, 90s me just kind of crept in there, but Jubilee and Roberto is watching what appears to be the same TV program of a guy with the red Letterman jacket that they watched back in the Fire Made Flesh episode. But notice how Trish's B-roll is able to catch a lot of these mutants in just their sad private moments, including Scott and Jean from multiple angles, inside and outside, with their backs to each other during morning coffee. Jean's hair is now back in a ponytail because she doesn't want any confusion over whether she's Jean or Madelyne. X-Men director from the 90s era, Larry Houston, tweeted in the past few days that all the way back in season 2, episode 7, Time Fugitives Part 1, when Jean Grey scanned Cable's mind, images of Scott and Jean appear, but Jean in that vision had long hair, whereas Jean at this point in continuity had a ponytail, implying that all the way back in 1993, they intended on Cable's mother being Madelyne Pryor. They knew back then, and Jean at the time reacted a bit confused, saying, how could this be? Houston clarified on Twitter that Jean in that moment was seeing a memory image, not a snapshot of the future. Phrasing that was very confusing because Cable is literally from the future, but he was seeing his memory of who his mother would be, rather than like predicting that they were going to be doing this Goblin Queen storyline in like a Disney Plus reboot. So Trish reports that today is a day the UN officially welcomes the nation of Genosha into its membership. Roberto da Costa mentioned that this was happening back in the Mutendo episode, and in that episode they did visit the island back in the days when it was still being developed during the events of season 1, episode 7, Slave Island, which was initially as a trap to enslave mutants and force them into labor. But after the events of the season 4 Sanctuary arc that was set on asteroid M, Magneto took control of Genosha to turn it into his new mute colony. And in the events of the finale, season 5, episode 10, Graduation Day, Magneto was leading a rebellion from Genosha against humanity until Charles Xavier's attack from Gyrick led Magneto to stand down. Now, on the way to Genosha, Magneto tells Gambit,
should the new Blackbird suffer a malfunction, you are the only soul on board for whom gravity would most certainly be an issue.
This is indeed a new Blackbird jet since we saw the Blackbird get shot out of the sky back in episode 1. Remy notices some renovations that have been made to Genosha since their last visit and now has this massive central pyramid structure flanked by 2 bronze-colored statues of Magneto and Charles Xavier, both with their arms outstretched like the Argonauts statues in the Fellowship of the Ring, or as we see in Numenor in the Rings of Power, the giant statue of Arundel and his wife Elwing in bird form perched on his shoulder. As a contrast to those stay-out poses of the Argonaut, Arundel has his palm outstretched, welcoming visitors as these statues do. It kind of feels like the whole sentiment behind the Statue of Liberty, which is based on the Colossus of Rhodes from the 7 Wonders of the Ancient World, and the Statue of Liberty was supposed to welcome immigrants to its shores. And obviously Magneto in the X-Men films has, a whole history with the Statue of Liberty. But doesn't it feel a bit wrong for Magneto to be using Charles's image like this? Because as a segregated place of their own, it's kind of the opposite of what Charles really wanted. Charles wanted true integration and for mutants to coexist in the same places and neighborhoods and really the same social status as normal humans. So as happens happy as this looks, there is a bit of judgment we should have underpinning it. Now, in this city, there are posters of Magneto everywhere, and it seems to be a true safe haven, but, you know, this isn't for long. The place is filled with these young mutants who might be familiar to you. We first see this parrot who turns back into this girl with bangs the same color as the plumage. I'm trying to figure out who this is. I thought it maybe was Carmen Cruz from the Children of the Atom storyline. Her hair never looks like that though, and she is more introverted than this kid is, but she is a metamorph. And then Leech, you'll remember as the mutant power dampening member of the Morlocks, and he made a brief appearance earlier this season when Magneto saved the Morlocks from the FOH. Then Pixie, aka Megan Gwynn, appeared. She debuted in New Mutant Academy #5 in 2004, and in the Wolverine of the X-Men animated series, she's known for brightly colored insectoid wings and her ability to produce hallucinatory pixie dust. She's the daughter of Mastermind, but she's not known to be a teleporter as she is here. Then Glob Herman is here. He originally appeared in Grant Morrison's new X-Men #117 and enrolled at the Xavier Institute before joining the Omega Gang. His flesh is made out of translucent pink living wax that makes him resistant to damage. A version of him was played by Clayton Dean Watmoff in 2006's X-Men The Last Stand. Then this mutant with purple wings who floats across the crosswalk might be Lavina LeBlanc, aka Gargoyle, a member of the Acolytes led by Exodus, who we actually see later. There's this mutant girl with antlers. This is Lynn Lee, aka Nature Girl from Wolverine of the X-Men Volume 2 #1 in 2014. Naturally, she is watering plants since her power is largely a connection with nature. We actually saw her earlier this season in the premiere on the cover of the Daily Bugle. I mentioned the Hellfire Gala, which might be what we see in this episode, though it is never explicitly called the Hellfire Gala. But if you read the more recent comics from the 2021 Reign of X storyline, you'll know what the Hellfire Gala is and why that clue back in episode 1 pointed to this moment and why we should be so terrified of it. Because the Hellfire Gala is when Krakoa opens its gates for a big party, kind of like a state dinner, and a lot of shit goes down, including, spoiler warning, the murder of Scarlet Witch. And there is a fascinating play-by-play of all the night's events, as it's kind of left to a mystery how people missed this. Well, we also see a print ad for cosmetics, Sharp Beauty, finally, for nails, scales, and horns, and there's a model with long fingernails that kind of reminds us of Lady Deathstrike. Then we see Laser Vision Arcade, which seems like a reference to Cyclops' optic blasts, and then this ice cream vendor chills something to make ice cream for Leech. I was thinking maybe this could be Bobby Drake Iceman, but that would be a huge step down for such an important character. So Genosha has safe and pleasant public transportation, and between the street vendors and the music and the blackbird flying overhead, it's clear that they wanted to evoke the vibes that we felt from the arrival to the Golden City in Wakanda in 2018's Black Panther. We see the flag of Genosha showing its emblem looking much like it did in the comics, and whereas we've been used to crowds in this animated series holding mean signs signaling only hate, here the mutant signs read "Mutants Matter, Magneto is right, and welcome X-Men." And the phrase "Magneto was right" was a popular rallying cry by mutants in the wake of Magneto's supposed death shortly after Genosha was recognized by the UN back in the comics. And greeting them is Dr. Valerie Cooper from the UN, and she's voiced by Catherine Disher, who originally voiced Jean Grey, or was it Madelyne, in the 90s run. And we need to keep an eye on Dr. Cooper, I think. She's always around when bad shit happens, right? Like, I think she could be a form of Mystique, or based on the fact that a giant Wild Sentinel attacks this episode, she could even be a form of Cassandra Nova, who leads the E's for Extinction Genosha Massacre in Grant Morrison's run. So Charles Xavier's Mumudrai evil twin, who will be the villain in Deadpool 3. Just keep an eye on Dr. Cooper. We'll keep talking about her throughout this breakdown. But also, back from episode 3 of the season, I can't believe we're seeing her already, Madelyne Pryor. We learned that she earned a spot in Genosha's High Council. We also get the return of Nightcrawler, Kurt Wagner. Nightcrawler is voiced by Adrian Hoff, who voiced him for his appearances in the 90s run, season 4 episode 8 Nightcrawler, and season 4 episode 14 Bloodlines. Hoff also played Jean Grey's father in 2006's X-Men The Last Stand. When Nightcrawler teleports, he technically travels through what's called the Brimstone Dimension, and so the transfer is often accompanied with these wisps of smoke. Since Wolverine's sound effect for his claws is snicked, we will refer to all Nightcrawler teleportations by his sound effect, BAMF, B-A-M-F. And they really nailed the BAMF sound effect for every single one of Nightcrawler's jumps in this episode. Gambit remembers Nightcrawler's killer monks back at the monastery, referring to the events in season 4 episode 8 Nightcrawler. Kurt is now here in Genosha working with all the faith communities as he is a devout Catholic. And Nightcrawler being this leader figure for all the faith communities within mutant kind is something that we do see in the Krakoa storyline. Nightcrawler bamfs Rogue and Gambit to the Genosha marketplace. This bird girl flaps past them and reacts to their sudden appearance, rightfully freaked out, and the pixie whispers something behind her hand. They did such a good job with the animation making these kids feel like authentic kids who are just like comfortable and grounded in this place, which makes it so heartbreaking that they lose it. It seems like Leech is nervous to see another energy absorber mutant like Rogue because he really gives her some side eye, but then Pixie teleports to grab Leech from behind, and then we get this weird edit where Glob Herman is still walking to the right and then immediately is in the next frame before Pixie reappears with Leech. He's already there at the fountain fist bumping this other kid. Based on how close everyone is getting to Leech, it looks like he's getting better about controlling his powers. You do see him sweating though, and it's just sweet how they test him just to mess around, not really worried about themselves. There's this girl in the fountain, and based based on the tattoos on her body, at first she reminded me of Alani Ryan, aka Loa, from the New Mutants Volume 2, number 11 in 2004. In addition to her tattoos, she can phase through matter and it crumbles as she does so. But there is another mutant in an orange cocktail dress at the gala later who looks more like Loa to me, so I'm wondering if this girl could actually be Christina Cord, aka Longstrike, which would make a bit more sense because she has a thing with the character named Slick, who might be to the far right of this, Quincy Marrow, also from the Grant Morrison New Mutants number 126 in 2002, and we later see him perching the exact same way Slick does, so I'm pretty sure that is Slick. Leech knocks her into the water and she's lifted back out by this other aquatic mutant with red goggles, and I'm wondering if this is Carl Alston, aka Rainboy, from X-Men Volume 2, 171 in 2005. Rogue says,
"It's just like he said it'd be."
Who? The professor?
Yeah, sure.
She's clearly referring to Magneto, her current hookup pal, but she doesn't want to make Gambit jealous. Nightcrawler bamps beside the fruit vendor who pats him on the head, and then Nightcrawler says,
"More than a place. A home."
Yes, it definitely echoes Odin in Thor Ragnarok.
Asgard is not a place. Never was. Asgard is where our people stand.
Gambit points out that apples cost $10, as is often the case in smaller countries that have to import a lot of their produce, but the fact that it's $10 feels a bit like a Lucille Bluth reference.
I mean, it's one banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10?
Rogue pays the vendor in pink-colored currency, which she already had, suggesting that maybe Magneto might have given her some local currency before they got here. A musical performance breaks out in the square, and we see some dancing by Multiple Man, aka James Madrox, who appeared in the Cold Comfort episode of the 90s run. He can cast duplicates of himself, and he was played by Eric Dane in 2006's X-Men The Last Stand. That's really the live-action X-Men movie where they're just like, put everyone in there. But this dancer is Benet du Paris, aka Exodus, who, in the recent Krakoa storyline, is part of the Krakoan Leadership Council. And then this other mutant, Elisa Teger, aka Cypher, phases through him. It's such a cool way to show them dancing in this duet. But they step aside to reveal Dazzler. Dazzler is the mutant pop singer who can create pretty light shows, and she appeared in the original Mojo Vision episode as a makeup artist. Last episode, Mojo said that Dazzler got a new gig, and I assume this is that new gig. Dazzler also appeared in season 3, episode 14, The Dark Phoenix Part 1, Dazzled, when the Inner Circle tried to induct Dazzler, and Scott stops this, and then Jean gets jealous when Scott checks in on Dazzler. So it kind of seems like Dazzler is only ever brought in when Scott and Jean are going through marital conflicts, as they are in this episode. Though, since I'm crazy, I also choose to believe that Dazzler's new gig could also refer to Taylor Swift playing Dazzler in Deadpool and Wolverine. Then this woman with red star earrings and sunglasses greets Rogue. I think this is Abigail Boom Boom. She shows up at the gala later. As Gambit longs for Rogue, Nightcrawler says,
There is no love without sin. For love is best measured in what we forgive.
Yeah, definitely hits differently as this episode ends. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. Being healthy means more than just eating well and going to the gym. It means being mentally healthy too. Just like you might need a trainer to help you with your gym routine, you might need a therapist to help you with your mental health. And BetterHelp can help you find one that is right for you. BetterHelp makes starting therapy easier and less intimidating for a lot of people. First, use our link to go to their site, betterhelp.com/newrockstars. The site will ask you to answer a few questions so BetterHelp can match you to an experienced professional who specializes in whatever you're struggling with. You can do it all from your phone or computer via phone call, video chat, or messaging, however you feel most comfortable. It's the easiest possible way to start talking to a therapist. You'll be matched to a therapist usually within 48 hours, so you can get started fast. We've been promoting BetterHelp for a while, and we've heard some amazing feedback from you guys. We got permission to share this review from one of our viewers who said, quote, "I used to be against the idea of therapy and didn't need it. After one session with my therapist, I completely pivoted and realized how beneficial therapy truly is. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/newrockstars or choose New Rockstars during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month." Meanwhile, Trish interviews Scott about Marvel Girl, referring to Jean. Marvel Girl was her original name back in 1961. Wolverine finds Jean in the pond, having cleared back the water and using spheres of the water to reflect back her memories. Both she, while talking with Logan, and Scott, while talking to Trish, remember the same memory in Nevada when Jean first acquired the Cosmic Phoenix Force and she removed his ruby quartz glasses to see his eyes, using the Phoenix Force to hold back his optic blasts. Whenever this was, it likely would have been Jean trying to recapture the moment from season 1, episode 5, Captive Hearts, when Leech's power dampening effect allowed Scott to show his eyes without any covering, and he and Jean kissed. Scott says that Jean was still the hothead who knocked my books out of my hand when I ran into her on the first day of school. In the 2016 film X-Men Apocalypse, Scott did bump into Jean, causing her to drop her books, and in X-Men The Last Stand, we saw Phoenix Force Jean block Cyclops' optic blast, like when he talks about here. That was the moment when they just randomly killed off James Marsden because he had like schedule conflicts and they refused to shoot shoot the movie out of order. Logan warns Jean about drowning in the past, and as they stand face to face, I like how she's got like a foot on him because Logan is supposed to be short and stocky, and they kiss, but Logan turns away knowing that Scott and Jean are the ones who are supposed to be together. And if there's anyone who can understand what Jean is going through right now, it is Logan. In season 4, episode 16 of the original Weapon X Lies and Videotape episode, Wolverine discovers that he was given false memories and he has no idea which parts of his past are real and which are fake. Trish asks about baby Nathan, whom she learned about from the hospital records, and Scott is reminded that the doctor refused to deliver that baby, and he's clearly just pissed off. Like, why is there some OBGYN who's like, yeah, I delivered that famous baby, when he clearly did not want to deliver it, he called it a freak. So Scott rightfully snaps, and he tells Trish that humanity are ungrateful for their sacrifice, and he storms out of the interview. At Genosha, turns out the council that Magneto and Madelyne Pryor are a part of includes Sebastian Shaw from the Inner Circle in the Hellfire Club, along with his ally Emma Frost, as well as Callisto from the Morlocks, Moira McTaggart, and Banshee Sean Cassidy. In the recent Krakoa run of the comics, Krakoa was also run by a quiet council that included members from different mutant sects, just like this, including Emma Frost and Sebastian Shaw. They were on the original Krakoan Quiet Council in the comics, as were Magneto, Exodus, who also appears this episode, and Jean Grey and Nightcrawler. But the fact that Moira McTaggart is on this council is very important to the Krakoa storyline, if that did inspire this, because we learn that Moira McTaggart is actually a mutant with the ability to be reborn after death, retaining all the memories from her previous lives. It's through this ability that she is able to work with Charles to create Krakoa in the comics. And her son, Proteus, Kevin McTaggart, who we also saw in the X-Men animated series before, is a member of the Five in Krakoa, who along with Egg, aka Goldballs, are able to resurrect mutants after death. So Magneto is reluctant to lead Genosha as Chancellor, and he recalls Charles pitching him his dream at a bar in Germany when they were younger men. Magneto, who Madelyne Pryor calls Magnus in this episode, alludes to Moses in the book of Exodus and how his role was to lead the Hebrews to the promised land, but God forced them to wander through the desert for a full generation so that no one from the old generation could enter it. This concept is a really important theme to Judeo-Christian beliefs, that it is a function of each generation to give our children a better world than we had, and not force them to have it as bad as we did, and to just find peace in people younger than us having things a bit easier thanks to our struggles. Somehow that idea gets lost when it comes to things like student loan forgiveness. But the fact that he makes this allusion is also interesting, considering that we saw Jean walking through the lake at Xavier Mansion like Moses parting the Red Sea. Magneto proposes that Rogue lead at his side as queen, and he encourages her power as that of empathy. We get this crazy moment where Jean asks Scott about baby Nathan.
I can't see color, but up here, I see these big brown eyes and this wild rust-colored hair.
And it seems like all is fixed between the couple, but nope. The real Jean shouts at this invader into their shared subconscious, and we learn Madelyne was trying to reconnect with Scott. This is a psychic rapport that Jean had been telling Logan about before, and now Madelyne is using it as well as like a three-way call, and they just have it out. Jean reminds Scott that as a Phoenix, she turned down galaxies that were beckoning her, and Scott says that since Jean is struggling with her memories, the love that she feels might just be a feeling and not rooted in actual history. And just creates this fascinating dialogue about whether love can exist without a shared history. And she says this:
Sinister cuts out a part of me and you love it?
Oh, she talks about Madelyne like she is like a tumor. In the comics, Scott and Emma Frost had a psychic affair in a very, very similar manner. And later there's a line where Emma is like mind drift indeed. Since Emma Frost is psychic, I think she knows exactly what is happening with Madelyne here. Rogue tells Remy about her backstory with Magneto. We actually saw part of Rogue's backstory in season 2, episode 9, A Rogue's Tale, when her father disowned her for her mutant status, and the blonde woman she knew as her mother was actually Mystique in disguise. In the comics, Rogue's origin was that she was originally a member of Magneto's Brotherhood of Mutants before joining the X-Men. So yes, it's worth noting that Rogue and Nightcrawler both have a mother, Mystique. But, you know, in Nightcrawler's case, technically in recent comics, Mystique is like his father. It's complicated, I'll get to it. But in the library, she carries this book titled Savage Land, Savage Hearts, which seems inspired by the name of season 3, episode 12 and 13, Savage Land, Strange Heart, in which the X-Men fought Garok and Sauron in the jungle Savage Land. This flashback will be taking place before Rogue or the X-Men knew anything about the Savage Land, but Magneto had likely been going there for years and performing experiments to create his mutates. Rogue explains how Magneto's electromagnetism created a protective layer that allowed them to touch each other, and she and Remy argue, and I love how their conversation is framed with the fireplace flames in the foreground as both their hearts are burning for each other, but Rogue is unable to feel it. And when Gambit asks, are you going to accept his offer, he holds up the Queen of Hearts, which is the card that he dropped when he found out that the two were hooking up in a past episode. Okay, on to the Gala. And the craziest cameo of this episode in the night sky, that is Uatu the Watcher watching this. Whoa. He looks somewhat different from how he appears in the What If series, but it's definitely Uatu. The Watcher also made a brief cameo back in season 3, episode 16, Dark Phoenix Part 3, The Dark Phoenix, noticing Jean leaving the planet, also noticed by Thor and Doctor Strange. So yes, he has been tracking the X-Men for a while. And it's worth noting that in addition to What If, the Watcher also appeared in I Am Groot season 2, which shows baby Groot as he appears in live action Guardians Volume 2. So the Watcher really is the link to everything, and I think he's gonna show up in Fantastic Four. This cameo directly links X-Men 97 to the same multiverse as everything else in the MCU. Marvel in the past week teased some comic titles to read for the Fantastic Four film, including the 3-issue Galactus arc that begins with the Watcher intervening to warn the Fantastic Four about Silver Surfer and Galactus, suggesting that we might see a live-action version of Jeffrey Wright Watcher in that film. So why is the Watcher here? Well, we're gonna see the second half of this episode, and I think it's incredibly important that the Watcher is looking at every single thing that happens in this night to try to figure out when exactly the Nexus moment happened. And he has to do that because all the people who are participating are distracted. Dancing during this gala is Dazzler, Nightcrawler, and the devilish Azazel, who was originally the father of Nightcrawler until that was retconned recently in 2023, so that Kurt Wagner is actually the love child of Mystique and Destiny. And Mystique shapeshifts into a male form with genetic traits of Baron Christian Wagner and Azazel, so Mystique is really Nightcrawler's father, and Destiny is his mother. And this apparently is what Chris Claremont in the 1980s considered for Nightcrawler, but he wasn't able to do it back in the 80s. Archangel cameos, as does Squid Boy, wearing a tuxedo. He dries himself off right away. And the flora in the background looks like the corpse flower behind Gambit at the bar. These bloom for only 2 to 3 days every couple years, and interestingly, they smell awful, hence the name, but I think we are looking at a lot of clues pointing to doom and death at Genosha this night. I made a video about the Fantastic Four film explaining how anytime you see a seemingly perfect utopia in a movie or a show, writers really treat this as like a Tower of Babel that they must destroy as soon as possible. Rogue joins the party set to Ace of Base's Happy Nation, and if you remember, back in Madelyne's vision during her time in Gyrick's mind, we also heard this same song.
No, not again. I'm so sorry.
And as she sees a dust person say, "No, not again, I'm sorry," this dust person is the same voice of Cable that we see later in this episode, who says the same thing.
No, not again. I'm so sorry, Mom.
So in a way, she was really foreseeing this moment and foreseeing into the future a vision given to her through a telepathic link with her son. The red dress that Rogue wears here is actually the same one from the same issue where there's the infamous basketball scene in X-Men number 4 that got referenced in the shot of Rogue and Gambit in the opening title sequence. Magneto just shoves his drink in Cooper's hand, keep an eye on Cooper, and Gambit begins to rise too, but since both Rogue and Magneto can levitate, Magneto joins her where she's at, and we see their two hands framed with Gambit in between, crushed between the two as Magneto's electromagnetism allows skin-to-skin contact. Magneto reminded Gambit pointedly in the jet earlier that he was the only one of them who could not fly, and now this is what leaves Gambit out of the dance. Madelyne gets hit with a psychic blast to her head, and notice that it is colored pink at first, but there's a different part of the blast that is colored blue, and New Rockstars Evan observed that this pink versus blue color scheming could be like Nathan Summers' Cable versus Rachel Summers' Ascani, coded blue and pink, reaching out through their ancestry. But we see the dust cloud face of Cable, and she finds herself back in the desert from episode 1, the giant face of the Master Mold, which I think we can now interpret as the source of the giant Wild Sentinel threat that comes this episode. She also sees visions of rats, and I feel like we're gonna come back to that. Madelyne's nose bleeds, which I interpret as not visions hurting her, but rather her fighting the horror of this vision so much that she gives herself a nosebleed. Notice how when Madelyne goes outside, she is in pink light, and then she's in teal light from the fireworks, and the pink versus blue color scheme is coming back, and with the blue firework comes the sun. Cable. Chris Potter voices a character. He warns everyone to get out. This is Madelyne's baby Nathan, all grown up in the future after being cured of his techno-organic virus. By the way, he passes Marrow. That's a mutant who was on the missing poster in the opening moments of the season premiere. So these fireworks are pink, blue, and yellow, and Cable looks across the island to see another color that does not belong in that scheme, green, because these are not fireworks, these are deadly explosions. And tragically, the partygoers don't even notice until it's too late. This is probably by design to have this happen during the fireworks, right? Cooper. Cable tells his mother,
You have to get everyone out! Now! He's coming!
And his temporal cube emits from his arm tech, and he says, not again. I feel like he's gotta be referencing Apocalypse, who stole the same tech from him back in that season 4, episode 18, Beyond Good and Evil moment. But notice they added more circuitry to the cube just to give it more detail so that it looks more technological and less cosmic and magic, because in the MCU, we've since seen things like the Tesseract. But Madelyne recognizes Cable's brown eyes from her psychic rapport with Scott earlier, and now they glow blue, maybe from that psychic message that Madelyne left in the baby's brain. And remember, the last word of that message was the word remember. And this episode's title is Remember It. And there's definitely a connection there. So my theory for what is happening here is that the attack on Genosha is a historically significant nexus point for all of mutant kind. And it's kind of like a long lost true crime episode that the watcher is trying to rewatch and figure out exactly what happened moment to moment. In the comics, it's Cassandra Nova who weaponizes Master Mold in Ecuador for the E's extinction arc to kill 16 million mutants on Genosha. Here, there could be other people behind it, because Cable mentioned a he, and maybe he's referring to Apocalypse, because Apocalypse did want to kill mutants and humans equally to remake the world in his own image, or we could also be referring to Bastion, because I gotta correct something from last week. I pointed out this photo of Dr. Gottfried Adler with Forge in his home. Dr. Adler was a scientist whose identity Mystique assumed and is a man behind the mutant power dampening collar. But I failed to point out another figure on the other side of Adler. This is Bastion, aka Sebastian Gilberti from Uncanny X-Men 333 in 1996. He's an android in a combination of Master Mold and Nimrod. Nimrod is an advanced form of a Sentinel from an alternate future who was sent through the Siege Perilous, which is a gateway that offers a new life to anyone who crosses through it. And then Bastion is associated with the anti-mutant task force Operation Zero Tolerance, OZT, and the presidential campaign of Graydon Creed. So you're hearing some familiar words here, right? Another form of Mystique, the word tolerance. The final 3 episodes of the season is tolerance is extinction. So are we seeing a mix of Operation Zero Tolerance and E is for extinction? Maybe. But clearly Forge must have had some past with the X Factor as government contractors working with Dr. Adler, aka Mystique, on all kinds of mutant containment technology, and helping them was this guy, Bastion, who's kind of partly from the future, right? Part Nimrod from the future, part Master Mold. And I think Dr. Cooper, Mystique, might have allowed the UN to induct Genosha knowing that this attack would happen. Whether she's Mystique or Cassandra Nova, it's just not clear yet. Mystique would imply that Magneto might be in on it. Cassandra would imply that Charles Xavier has a role to play in stopping it. And who knows, maybe the he that Cable is referring to is some dark form of Charles Xavier. And if you look closely, there actually is a Bastion cameo in this episode. When Magneto first walks into the Gala, he looks up and someone in the foreground passes the camera, and that is the same haircut as Bastion. He was here, guys. Between this and the Forge photo, these animators are dropping major clues that Bastion is behind this. But Cable knew of this apocalyptic event on Genosha, and I think he's traveled back in time to stop it. But here he was too late, so I think he's gonna have to try again. I think the only way past this huge apocalyptic moment is some time travel storyline with Cable and Forge and Bishop and Storm and Bastion and other characters looping back in time to this night of the Gala to stop this massacre or to make sure it happens, and that's gonna be the war in the final 3 episodes of the season. The Hellfire Gala in the Krakoa storyline was famous for a minute-by-minute breakdown of all the events that happened throughout the night, and attendees being distracted by other happenings. It's kind of left a mystery how people missed these dark events in plain sight, and I expect this season to loop back on everything we saw in this episode, like precisely when all the heads returned to Magneto and Rogue dancing over their heads, who was there and who wasn't? Cooper. So the time rift opens and Cable is pulled back.
So sorry, Mom.
And again, this is the Cable voice that Madelyne heard in her vision before.
No, not again. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
So a deadly blast hits the Gala. We see it from Rogue's point of view as the sound cuts in and out as she comes to, seeing people running and smoke, floating embers, hearing screaming. There have been some comparisons from this imagery to 9/11, and that was clearly designed into the storyboards. But people who worked on the show also cited the Tulsa Race Massacre, which you see in the opening scene of HBO's Watchmen. I think there might be some other parallels to Watchmen that they worked into what's happening here. But what we see attacking here is what's called a Wild Sentinel. It's a giant 3-headed insectoid kaiju. This is a form it takes in the E is for extinction storyline where they use the Master Mold in Ecuador to produce this thing. But again, it remains a mystery who exactly sent this. Rogue looks up to see Banshee and Marrow. Banshee's like, get into the gardens, and then both are immediately vaporized by the Wild Sentinel's blast. Nightcrawler appears at the last second to bamf them to safety, and Rogue sees Nightcrawler bleeding, looks down at her hands, and her gloves are gone, so she can't check his pulse. But then she tells Gambit, hand me, and Gambit checks and he confirms,
You're alive. So are you.
Oh, he also says you're alive, like he has to reassure her that she's not dead yet. There's still work for her to do. Magneto asks how many are dead, and Gambit says so many. You'll notice that this episode asks the question repeatedly, but never confirms the casualty count or even an estimate. Maybe because it's Disney Plus and 16 million dead people is just too astronomically high for one night. Or maybe they didn't want this to be exactly E is for extinction and didn't want to give us a number. But we see corpses, Sebastian Shaw, Dazzler, Squid Boy, and Callisto. And I actually think we see the moment of her death as her pupil contracts. Oh my god. The Wild Sentinel drops rows and rows of sentinels. Dr. Cooper waves fleeing mutants to the gardens, but notice how they immediately get zapped, vaporizing like the victims of the Martians in Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds. I believe that initial laser sound effects might have been sampled from the tripod laser in the New Jersey attack scene of that movie. Magneto says,
"We shall not live our days wondering if we could have saved more."
Speaking of Steven Spielberg and knowing Magneto's past, we are reminded of Oscar Schindler and Schindler's List. I could have saved more. Gambit goes full Akira on this motorcycle, kicking up dust as the tires charge through the Sentinels. Magneto, protected in an electromagnetic bubble, collides with the statue of Charles and tragically crushes a group of mutants. Oh no! So Magneto spirals, he flashes to the statue face of Charles, and he briefly flashes to himself with his hand on barbed wire, being led into Auschwitz, and he and his parent with the yellow stars that the Nazis forced Jews to wear, and you can see tears on young Erik's face. And what does he use to whip the Sentinels? This train! The fact that Magneto goes from his own Holocaust trauma, saying they shall be avenged, and using a train to do it, it's powerful symbolism because many of these victims were transported to the camps in train cars. The Morlocks wait below. Scaleface, Urg, Ape, Tommy, and Leech, and Mask you see in the final shot. Optimistic Leech believes Callista will find them. Sorry, kid. And if not, maybe Magneto, but no, it is Gambit who saves them with Ron Wasserman's theme music pumping. The Wild Sentinel says Omega threat detected, as it said with Storm, but now the Omega threat is Magneto. Magneto protects the lowliest of mutants, the Morlocks, to fulfill his promise. And he says to Leech, which in German translates to "do not be afraid." The Wild Sentinel charges up to fry the people on the rooftop, and there's a quick cameo by Beau DeMayo himself, the showrunner for these episodes, who was abruptly fired by Marvel the week of the premiere for reasons we still don't really know. Gambit and Rogue have spent this battle joking around, but now we know the purpose of this, not just to keep their spirits up as they have this horrific battle, but as Gambit references his gambling metaphors, he's really just getting the attention of the Wild Sentinel to distract it so that he can impale himself and charge this appendage and turn the whole thing into an explosive. That's the only way he can bring it down. And his final words are the episode's title.
The name's Gambit, mon ami. Remember it.
And he blows it all up. And it's worth remembering Charles's final words to Gambit in the season 5 episode. How often must a scoundrel prove himself the hero before he believes it himself? The X-Men back at the mansion watch us on TV, like most of us watch the madness of 9/11, desperate to know how many deaths, but not getting an answer soon enough. The surviving mutants find Rogue, sobbing as she holds Gambit, finally able to let her bare skin touch his. He will never know that she did choose him. We end the episode on Rogue's tears trickling down his bloody cheek.
Sugar, I can't feel you.
The ultimate tragedy is that when she could finally touch Gambit, there's no heartbeat there to feel. The words also echo what Wanda Maximoff said to Vision in that heartbreaking moment from WandaVision.
I can't feel you.
It also reminds us of Storm, unable to feel the breeze. It's an absolute gut punch of an episode. And a huge shout out to AJ Lucasio and Lenora Zahn. AJ, I know you watch our breakdown, so thank you for your amazing work on this episode and for supporting us. So who did this? And who sent this Wild Sentinel? Well, Cassandra Nova remains a top suspect. She is the one who uses the Ecuador Master Mold to produce this Wild Sentinel, and she uses Bolivar Trask to deploy it against Genosha to kill 16 million mutants. But this season of X-Men has adapted other stuff in the comics and reassigned the villain, like Cable's techno-organic virus being caused by Mr. Sinister instead of Apocalypse. So they could do that here with the fall of Genosha and maybe make it caused by Apocalypse instead of Cassandra. But there is a chance that Magneto might have orchestrated this as a false flag attack to martyr himself. Like there have been references to Ozymandias in episode 1, this Egyptian pyramid design of Genosha, as well as twin colossuses of Rhodes, ancient wonder of the world, Magneto casting himself as a reluctant leader and now a martyr, crashing into Charles' statue but leaving his own merely headless so that everyone could see his sacrifice. It could just point to Magneto being a Watchman Ozymandias figure, orchestrating a mass carnage event with all cameras pointed at it to bring the warring sides of this planet together against a shared enemy. It would be a pretty insane twist, but it's something I would not put past this version of Magneto. Let me know in the comments below what you think is going on here, and a huge thanks to Brandon Barrick, Gina Ippolito, and Evan Yee for their help with the research on this breakdown. Comment down below with your thoughts from this episode. Follow me at EA Voss. Subscribe to all 3 channels of the New Rockstars Network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching. Bye.